Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Dr. Nobody podcast with your host, Dr. Nobody. Today, we have Scott Garret, who is my father-in-law, spoiler alert. And today, he's just going to talk to us a little bit about his career and how his faith has played a role in it and what it entails and things like that. And I'm just going to ask him a couple questions here and there. But Scott, since I want the listeners to really hear from you, just give us a little bit about your backstory, your bio, and just feel free to roll it through.
Sure. And thank you, Dr. Nobody, for the opportunity to be here with you to discuss all this. So when you talk about my career there, you really have to break it down into two categories. Okay. So my first career, and I guess you would say continuous career, was as a lawyer, right? So that is what I did when I got out of school. I went to college and went to Rutgers University and got my JD, become a lawyer. So that was my profession. And then my other career, we can talk about that too, is my political one. And that's where I was running for office or helping other people with their campaigns, involved with all sorts of things. So I have, you might say, a two-track careers to talk about. First one, just for background, let's say the legal one. So that's something that I knew I wanted to do since I usually say I was around the seventh grade. How old is that? 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 or 12 years old. I was in junior high school, I remember, and people would say, "What do you want to do?" And usually you have all sorts of strange things people want to be when you're in your junior high school. I knew what I wanted to be right then, and that was to be a lawyer. And so from then on, that's what I aimed to be. So I would get books out of the library about the law. One of the first ones was the Reader's Digest book, You and the Law. Now it just comes to my mind. And so I would just focus on that in junior high and high school, and then went on to college. I don't think they had what you call, nowadays colleges have pre-law, I think, in them. Back in those days, which would be 30 plus years ago, there was no such program. So if you wanted to be a lawyer, you usually studied what I did, which was political science and a minor in philosophy and minor in environmental studies. That's my one career background. And with that, what I do, I work for a number of different small law firms here in New Jersey and here in my county where I live now. First job was out actually working as a clerk or a judge. And then from there, working as in-house attorney, trial attorney for an insurance company. Because that's my whole legal career. So that's one plate of information background. The other one is the political, right? So politics was also something I was interested in at a very young age. So probably the same thing, junior high. So junior high, I was involved in politics, ran for something or other probably then, and put out a own little newspaper in junior high, put out a little, what we used to call in the old days, an underground newspaper in high school. And I don't know if people use that expression anymore. And then ran for office, ran for school board, didn't get elected. And then what else after that? Then ran for state legislature, got elected, and then ran for Congress. That's a nutshell. I can give that in much more detail than anybody wants to hear. But that's my background. And I ended up, as I said, in Congress. How many years? 14 years in Congress. 14 years in Congress. A little bit in 35 seconds or maybe twice that, in a nutshell, the history of Scott Garret.
Yeah, it was definitely more than 35 seconds.
Yeah, well, when you're ruminating on such things.
So it's just interesting that you got into it really young. How did you know that you wanted to be a lawyer? What triggered you? What did you see, a show, or your parents told you? Like, what was it?
I don't think it was my parents per se. Maybe it was TV. Today as then seems like half the shows on TV, drama shows, are either doctor shows, hospital shows, or police shows, or legal shows, and that's the case today, I think, and that was the case back in the 60s and 70s as well, growing up as a kid. So if I spent a lot of time, I could probably figure out what it was that was on TV as legal shows back then, dramas that probably caught my eye. I don't know if there's anything more to it than that. history was always one of my favorite studies in school and what have you. But I don't know. I can't pinpoint to anything else than just saying, "Hey, I want to be a lawyer," and it interested me. Where my passion was at that point in time.
So I guess my next question is then, was there anybody in your career that helped mentor you or guided you throughout your journey from, I guess, junior high school all the way up to being a congressman?
Um, let me let me think. Um, Not necessarily in the lower grades. When I was a kid, there was a thing back in those days called Boy Scout Explorers, which maybe they still have today. And that's like particular, you were not really in the Boy Scouts, but they have different topics if you want to go into those professions or what have you, or interest. And one of them was law. I think I joined that, attended one meeting, and they disbanded. So I guess there was no mentoring. Yeah, I guess there was no mentoring there. Yeah, that was a case that comes to memory. That was an odd situation where they had their first meeting. I couldn't attend. There was a friend of mine who went there, part of the group. They were this was maybe one of the first times I ran for office, so I was going to be the head of it, and and I couldn't be there, so somebody else spoke in my absence for me. And even though I wasn't there, I won. And I was elected the chairman of it. Unfortunately, I think we lost our official guidance counselor type people who ran it, and so we didn't actually end up having any more meetings. But to your point, was there somebody who mentored me in the law? No, certainly not in high school per se, and in college, no. And then after that, you just go into law school. So nope, I guess can't think of any along the way. I guess
And nobody during your actual career, during being a congressman, and any points during that?
yeah, on the legal side, as far as mentoring, no. I mean, you go, as you go through any career. Well, I mean, for me anyway, you would go through a career profession, or there are people who will answer questions for you. I remember my first job was with, I won't use the name, but a national syndicated type law firm, where they sort of stick you in a office. You're there all by yourself. There's no other attorneys. You have one secretary who is not really a paralegal or a legal secretary. They're just someone that the company hired. And so there you are, and people are coming in the door, and you're sort of thrust into it situation. So it's what's that expression? I can't think of it. You're under fire on day one, so to speak. And so they're mentoring, no, but you certainly could pick up the phone, as I did, and just would give a phone call to other lawyers who I happen to know or what have you, and say, what do I do here? How do you handle this? And they would give me some good sage advice on how to handle this case or that case. My first job as a lawyer was a clerk. Mentioned that before, and that was Judge Conforti. I think he's retired from the bench now. Great judge. I think he was only on the bench maybe the second year when I was working for him. Great professional person, great person. And so he was great giving me advice in my first year as a clerk, for sure. But along the way, I guess, no, you would just rely on your own wits and people you give a call to once in a while when you have a case and say, how do I handle this along the way? Because, by the way, that is, if anyone is listening, if anyone who is listening to this says, I want to become a lawyer, one thing that you do learn right away when you get out of law school is that law school does not prepare you for being a lawyer. They teach you all sorts of plethora of legal theory and what have you, but not the practical aspects of how do you run a law firm, how do you handle this particular case when you get to court, and that sort of thing. It may be different now. I think law schools now have more practicums and that sort of thing, and the practical aspects of it. But back in those days, you'd have tort law and contract law and constitutional law, but not actually any courses on how do you file the pleadings that you are going to engage in when someone comes in the door and says, "Hey, I need, I'm having a divorce case or something." There, you have to call up and get advice from other people and say, "How do I do this?" That's how it was back 30 years ago. I don't know how it is today.
I wouldn't be able to tell you either.
Yeah, yeah.
But, that's interesting. It's good that, definitely you did what you had to do. You had to pick up the phone and you were proactive about things. And that's definitely a theme that's come up with a lot of other interviews, just being proactive, even if there's a lack of mentoring or guidance from anybody else. But how did you know when you were ready for the next level, like for the next step? So how did you know that, after being a lawyer, eventually you wanted to, reach the next level of being a congressman?
Well, I don't know that necessarily the next level. Certainly, you could be a lawyer and never go into politics. You can be a lawyer and be much more successful at law than I was, in the sense that I was as a people describe it as small town country lawyer, although the town's not so small anymore. Um, and that's all good. That's all fine. And so that can be satisfactory in and of itself. The politics was just something that ran alongside of it. It was, I may have said at the outset, something that interested me from an early age as well. Um, so just as people have their vocation and avocation, I had both as well, with politics being something that interests me. So how did I get into it? Um, you know, a neighbor was running for office, and he needed somebody to work on his campaign. And I said, "Hey, here I am." And not only did I work on his campaign, I ran his campaign, not successfully, but I ran his campaign. Um, I had a great neighbor over the hill from me. Our farm was the next farmer, and he was a somewhat of a local media personality, a bright guy who wrote several books and what have you. And he would have these little meetings in his house for a while. What do you call it? Hemlock Society, I think he called it for a while. Goes back decades. And most of it was older people, I'll say adults who went to it, and here I was the only teenager in the room, because it's just sort of these discussions on politics and philosophy and that sort of thing just all fascinated me. One thing that someone in my family told me early on in my interest in politics was, and this is a bit of advice I give to other people, especially young people who say they think they want to go into politics. I say, never make politics and your profession. Always have something else that interests you, so that when you fail as a politician, and you will fail at some point, meaning you'll lose your election, you want to have something that you still want to do to fall back on. And the reason that is because if you don't, then that means as a politician, you have no place to go but to stay in politics. And if that's the case, then you will cut any deal, give up any values, give up any moral positions that you may have, because you realize you have nothing else to fall back on. You better stay. You better give in, be co-opted, because you have nothing else to do other than being a politician. That was advice somebody in my family gave me on early on, and that's why I was a lawyer. That was my chosen passion and profession, but politics was something that I could just do on the side. And then what happens there is that you go into it incrementally. As I said, you hang out at meetings, political meetings. You start going to the more sophisticated discussions on it. You work on other people's campaigns. Somebody asks you to manage their campaign. You run for a low, in the scheme of things, a lower level of office, win or lose, and you just keep on. If it's your passion and your interest and your drive, you just keep on going and see where life brings you to.
The Just going back what you were mentioning before about the advice you had gotten from the family member, did you feel like you ever experienced that in your political career, where you had to make these tough decisions or awkward positions that you were put in? You don't have to talk about them specifically, but did you feel like that happened to you?
I mean, it happens to every person that is in politics all the time. Um, in politics, there is always so many competing forces, more than two sides, but at least two sides on every issue, and those forces are driving you in one way or another. And then in politics, there is the leadership, as it's called, the people who are above you in the party, or the organization who is always going to be who has their agenda, and they will be trying to put pressure on you to do this or do that. Sometimes it's what you want to do. Hey, that's fine. Sometimes it's not what you want to do. Then you have conflict. Then you have to decide, is this something important enough that I'm going to stand up for what my values believe in? Or if it's not that important, then you can make that compromise and agree for the good of the cause. But for that person who has nothing to fall back on, and I've seen examples of this, they become co-opted all the time because what else are they going to do? If they don't go along to get along, they won't get along. I remember, from my early days when I was in state legislature in New Jersey, I a number of strong positions and principles, which I stood on. One, not to get into politics, but just one principle was that we pay too much in taxes. I'm never going to vote for a tax increase. And so I remember leadership coming over to what they call working in the room, going from desk to desk to desk, saying, we need you to vote with us on this to raise the tax or what have you, and twisting of the arms. And they said, we're not going to even bother going over to talk to Scott because we know there's nothing we can say to him to get off of his position or his values on this. And so they stay away from you if they know that you're so committed to something and you're strong enough on it.
Interesting. So they just knew they couldn't get you. So that's good.
Yeah,
that's great to hear. One of the things I wanted to talk about besides your career is also about your faith and how it's impacted your life and your career. Can you indulge us a little bit about that?
Sure. Sure. So I'll put it this way: it didn't impact as much my career in politics, let's say, for the first portion of my time in office, and that's because I was not the man of faith that I am today, and that I have been since I became a born again believer. And so, when you're not, then it doesn't influence you. Makes sense, right? Once you become a born again believer, and your faith is the most important thing to you, then of course it's going to influence. It should influence every aspect of your life, right? How you conduct yourself, how you comport yourself, how you live out your life should be influenced by your faith, and so it did with me as well. I would understand Scripture to say that we were not to, hide the light under the bushel, as it says. You're not to be ashamed of your faith. You should not try to hide your faith, and I never did. I don't think. Matter of fact, sometimes people would accuse me of wearing your faith on your sleeve, is the expression someone used years ago. And all I do is, if somebody has a question about something or asks me about my faith, I'm willing to discuss it. And I'm not good at quoting line, chapter, and verse, as it were, of Bible verses, but I can sometimes incorporate in conversation some of the themes of the Bible into it to try to make a point. And that, of course, is not accepted in some quarters and is accepted in others.
So you say that you weren't always a man of faith. At what point did you change? I guess became a man of faith.
Yeah. So when in a forum where I give my testimony, I'm not like some people who are able to give their testimony, who are able to give that road to Damascus pinpoint of experience, to say this is the day and the hour and what have you. And I appreciate those people who are able to do it. They say this happened on this day, and I know it was from that point on. I can never really do that. Mine was always. It's a longer story, so we won't get on to all here, but it's a little bit over time, coming to the faith, as Scripture says that we were being called, and so I was being called, I guess, and heard His voice, and over a period of time came to be a believer, so from that point on, you grow in faith. There's justification, sanctification, glorification. So I was justified at some point in time that I can't give you the date, time, and hour. Sanctification, the sanctifying your life continues on continuously. until the day of glorification, which is your death and glory. So I'm in that middle stage now, of course. Justification has already occurred, and going through sanctification and having it apply to my life.
What I appreciate you sharing that and totally understand that aspect of, telling people, you know, how you became a man of faith as I experienced it too. I definitely don't have exactly the time and point that happened, but I have an idea, just like you, over time. But in your journey of being a man of faith, have you ever felt like you've been challenged to a point where you have fallen from your faith itself, or do you feel like it just empowers you?
Well, I would say the answer to the first question, I guess, is no, in the sense as far as it's some sort of challenge in politics or law, done something that, um, you know, how'd you say, fallen? No, I would say no to that. Now, whether I think I'm like most people, no, I can't speak for most people, but I say a lot of people say that over time, you certainly have questions that are that people struggle with, that I struggle with on faith. They come and go, ebb and hue of the times, what have you. But that I would not say that's anything to do with my profession. That's just the nature, I think, of the faith. I think most people have. But no, nothing in that any challenge. And really, as I say this, it's just the opposite. When those difficult times come from that your profession might put you in, and your faith is in conflict with, they just tend rather to strengthen your faith. That's when you fall back on your faith more, and it becomes even stronger for you.
And to that point, we just talked about how there are people that in politics that would come up to you or to people and try to change their positions on things. Did you ever feel like anyone did that to you to change your position, as a Christian?
Well, no, I don't know that anyone's ever come up and say, "Hey, you believe this, instead you should believe that." Now, well, I'll just go down a different rabbit hole here. Certainly, um, I find discussions of various faith interesting, and so there's people who I'm was involved in politics with who are of different faiths, and I certainly enjoy discussing with them their faith, and they enjoy discussing with me my faith, but more on a collegial or um, sort of basis, where you're just sort of learning more about theirs and not being trying to they're not trying to change mine for any particular reason. So you have those discussions, but I don't know that anyone ever tried to forcefully come and say, "Look, you're wrong on this, and you got to change the way your faith." Now, they may say you're wrong. They certainly have said over time, "You're wrong on this position or that position on politics," whether it's, we'll go into all of them, all litany of them, I'm sure. But they don't try to pull out the faith aspect of it, I don't think.
Hmm. Well, that's good. Everybody accepts it, and it's good to grow and understand others as well.
Well, I don't know that they, I don't know that, I don't, no, I don't know that they necessarily accept it. In other words, um, they may, if they take a contrarian view, what I would say is the wrong view on a particular topic, um, and they know that my view is based both on faith and also on law or practical aspects of life. Um, they'll still say you're wrong. They're not. They'll say the foundations for my views on that particular issue or issues. They would say it is wrong, and they, will not accept the position that I took, and B not accept the foundational basis for it as well. And that's you have to understand that, and the reason for that is one that who was it? Dennis Prager, I think, used this expression decades ago. He said, how do you put it? He says, if two people come along and are building a building of two different buildings, and they have different foundations. One foundation is going to be for an office building. The other foundation is going to be for a house. Well, then you can anticipate that the actual structure that is going to be constructed on top of those foundations are going to look entirely different from one another. Why? Because their foundations are fundamentally, structurally different from each other. And that's how it is in politics. If two people come to address a particular situation and their foundations, what they're basing their thoughts and opinions on, are fundamentally different, then you can anticipate that the structures that they're going to build, their political structures and the outcome of whatever that particular project is going to look different as well. And that's why in this country today, you have the divisiveness that you do, because people are coming from two different camps, two different worlds, two different foundational structures, and they're trying to build a world that's fundamentally different from each other. Just my 2 cents.
I appreciate that. And I'm going to ask you a question that's probably loaded is, in your opinion, how do you bring those two types of people to the table to be less divisive?
So, attempt to find out where the common ground is, if there's any. And so, that's the same case whether it's in law, negotiations, or in politics. So, in law and negotiations, if you have a contract and it seems like they're going totally different directions, or if you have a tort action, meaning physical injury action, somebody did something wrong against another party, they're obviously coming from contrarian views. Well, is there anything that they might agree on, as far as the liability issue or the risk issue or the damage issue? Maybe there's something you can find in law that they agree on. Same thing in politics. There's usually a myriad of issues that are being discussed on any piece of legislation or any other big topic. And so maybe there's one small element to it that you can agree on. And if you can, great. That's where you start on. But at the end of the day, that may also be where you end on too. So if it's a issue like abortion or something like that, it's hugely controversial. Big issue is not going to be agreed on, but maybe there's an issue of funding for healthcare within it or something like that can be crafted in the legislation that just deals with, and that at the end of the day, you just deal with that little sliver of the bill, and that's all you really can achieve. If that makes sense, the way I said that.
Yeah, no, definitely appreciate you taking a loaded question like that, trying to solve our country's issues in one answer.
The two questions come back together. A, you have to understand what the other position's foundation is, or as the old vernacular is, where's he coming from, as people used to say. If you understand that, then that helps, of course, to find that common ground on the intrinsically different outcomes that both parties are trying to achieve. In negotiations, that's the same thing. If you understand where the guy's coming from, or the flip side of it, where you're going to, what's his motive? What's he out to get? Well, if you understand that helps in the negotiations as to what you're going to settle on. Negotiations in law and contract matters and that sort of thing. We think that it's always about money, but it may not be. Somebody's coming to the table on a contract. It may not be that he just wants more money on the deal. It may be that he wants a particular outcome, and you might be able to succeed in that outcome even without addressing the issue of the money aspect of the contract. So if you can do that, then you have the common ground to at least settle the entire matter, or at least settle a portion of it. Take real estate. I did a little bit of real estate, tiny bit. Is it all about money? Well, if it's all about money, then you're probably not going to come to terms if you're too far apart. But if it's something then in real estate that the person particularly wanted in the land or the house or the structure, then maybe you can have another way to solve that problem and give that one party what he wants. Same thing in politics.
Got it. So how do you, just going off on a different topic, how do you explain about God and faith to people who really don't know about it or have little understanding of it?
Well, in one of the Bible classes that I took in DC when I worked in Washington, and I'll just digress for 30 seconds, will be just 30 seconds, is for people listening, there really are a lot of Bible studies that go on in Washington. They happen on the Hill all the time. They happen in the Capitol. They happen in the offices, and they happen in other restaurants and what have you around the Capitol. So there are Bible studies going on all the time. And in one of those, I used to attend several of them. One of them, I remember the leader of it used this expression. He said, you would not expect to go into a morgue and start talking to a dead person and have him understand what you're saying, if you can picture that little scene in your mind. And that makes sense. But how's it a biblical angle to it? Well, biblically, we understand that unless we have been called and come to faith, we are dead in our sins. And so use that analogy there. If you're talking to somebody who is dead in the sins, who have not come to the faith, they are not going to understand these things. And that's the dilemma that you have in the politics or the legal aspect. That's the dilemma that if you're talking to someone who is dead, still in their sins, who has not been justified, who has not been saved, then that conversation is going to be a difficult one. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have the conversation. That doesn't mean, Matthew 28 says that, in short, we are all to be out evangelizing the nations of the earth. All power in heaven and earth is given to Christ to go forth of all the nations and baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And he will be with us always till the end of the ages. So, we have our job, we have our marching orders, we have our commission, our great commission to do that. And so we are to go out to do that, but understand what the dynamics of it are going to be like.
Thank you. That was one of my next questions were,
I got ahead of you.
any one particular, yeah, well, it's great because now maybe you could talk about it more, but are there any one particular scripture verses in the Bible that you live by or can talk about? And I guess Matthew was one of them. Are there any other ones that you really depend on or read to other people about?
Yeah, so I'm not a great one for quoting, and I think I said at the beginning of this program, chapter and verse. I'll say this: one of my favorite songs, which I'm told was written by Jesuits, is "Here I Am, Lord," and that is from is it Isaiah 6:8 or 8:6? Isaiah 8, I think it is, where God is talking to Isaiah and in essence asking him to go forth, and Isaiah responds to him by saying, well, here I am. And matter of fact, now that I say this, we were discussing this in Bible study not too long ago. The song "Here I Am," do your listeners a favor here by not singing it, but they can listen to it. I'm sure they can find it on YouTube. Ask the question, who's the Lord of is asking, who shall I send to care for his people? And the refrain, is it called the refrain? Or is it the chorus? I forget what you call it. The song is "Here I am, Lord." Is I, Lord. I've heard you calling in the night. And it's like Isaiah did. And so it's that line saying that we are responding to God's calls to go forth and care for his people, God's people, which is his children. And so here I am. I am his instrument to carry that out. Yeah, I should probably look that up while I talk to you so I can give you the exact thing, but I can't find it right here. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, I got the gist of it.
People can YouTube that. That is a great little
exactly.
song. There you go.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
So one of the things I've experienced personally with my faith is that it's always been challenging, especially when I was doing my PhD in my graduate school, and I felt like a lot of people attacked me for it, especially my boss at that time. Did you feel like you've experienced anything challenging or opposition because of your faith in your life, or not just your Congress when you were a congressman in that career path, but any other point in your life?
Oh, absolutely. I would say most people do, but I don't know if that's the case really in our American culture, though that American culture is changing. But sure, I mean, I was not in my legal profession, but in my political world. In the political world, they'll attack you for any and everything. And so, yeah, I was attacked for my faith. My church and my pastor was attacked for their faith and what they stood for. And sure, so that was part of my life in politics. And that's to go back to an earlier question of you, is there how do you phrase it about, what happens when you're attacked? If you didn't phrase it that way, do you acquiesce or not? And I think my response to that question, wherever you put it, was no, that sort of strengthens you. You fall back on your faith, but then that often also can strengthen your faith at the same time. Now, this is something that, more and more people of faith in this country will be experience as we experience a cancel culture and a culture and a worldview that is obviously contrary to the Christian faith. And so those attacks will be increasing, saying that we're on the wrong side of history and so forth. This will just increase, just as it has increased throughout the ages, and as we see it has been in other parts of the world for a long time.
Yeah, definitely cancel culture. People talk about it more and more. Has become a more serious issue, but that's a different problem we could talk about another time.
That's the aspect of that. That is the aspect of attacking the faith, because it's trying to cancel what you believe at the same time. But anyway,
No, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, definitely makes sense. So, with the last couple minutes remaining here, I want to ask you two questions that I always ask all my guests. And that is, the first one is, what are or has been the best or worst moments in your life or your career? So you could focus, since we've been really focused on your career, you could really talk about that. And you can get personal, you don't have to get personal, it's up to you.
well, on the personal side would certainly be um, my two little kids, my children being born. Those were um, huge moments in any dad's life. That's for sure. And then, of course, it continues throughout their lives as well. In the focus of what we've been talking about, which is careers. Well, I remember that one big experience was getting that letter in the mail that I passed the bar. That was a huge, um, I took the bar, and that was agonizing. All the prep, I guess it still is today, to go through, and then you get the letter in the mail and says you passed. Because that's, as I mentioned at the outset of this program, that's something I wanted to do. At that point in my life, it would have been 10 years, right? I was let me see, if I was 10 or 11 years old when I wanted to start being a lawyer, and I passed the bar when I was 21, I guess. So there's 10 years of my life, hopefully, to become a lawyer, and bing, I got the letter set. That was a big experience. In politics, like, that's law, and a big experience in politics, of course, is, the first time you get elected. So it was huge when I ran first for state assembly. I ran in a race with five people in the primary. I was the one who they all considered would least likely get elected, but I worked with my family and some friends, and we really worked hard, and we surprised everybody on election night. We surprised everyone
Nice.
and won, and it was like, whoa. So that was huge. And Congress was the same deal, because with Congress there, I ran three times in 1998, 2000, and I lost by 2 points. And then 2 years later, in 2000, I lost by 1 point. And then in 2002, I won. So in politics, that was, to answer your question, a huge night for three times of trying to get over that mountain and succeed. Absolutely.
Well, you didn't give up, so that's good.
No, if there's a takeaway, it's persistence in these things. That's probably in any aspect of any career, right? Probably hear that from other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other one, and I think I could already write down one for you, is persistence. But what are five essential things you think people need to succeed in their life or career, and you can emulate it through your experiences?
Well, yeah, I mean, you threw. I think you just sort of said the words you maybe not intended it in your career or your life. In your life, to succeed, you should have a foundation of faith, because without that, everything is for naught and everything is in vain. What's the book? Ecclesiastes, which Solomon wrote. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. When without a faith and without a God, then all is vanity, because it is all short-lived. And for what is the struggle for then? So in life, it's to have a faith, faith that you base your life on and what you do on. Persistence is something you mentioned. The other is to have the passion for something that interests you. So there's an expression. What's that old? Find something you love to do and you never work a day in your life, right? I'm sure you've heard that 100 times. And so, I often see these TV shows where they're looking at people who are making a career out of surfing or rock climbing or NASCAR driving, and I'm thinking, wow, these people, they have they're doing fun things, and somehow they're making a career of it. But I guess that's everyone's. It should be your passion. Find what you love to do, and you never have to work a day in your life. Find that thing that you have a passion about. Easier said than done sometimes to actually make a living at it. That's right. But if you can, so much the better.
All right. Well, Scott, thank you so much for your time and your stories that you shared with us, especially about your career and faith. I think the listeners really learned a lot, and I did as well, and I really appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. It was a really great experience. Thanks.
Sure. Is it okay for the listeners to reach out to you on LinkedIn if they want to ask any questions or learn more about your career or faith?
Sure. I would love to engage with anyone who would like to reach out. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much again. Listeners, I hope you gained plenty of insights today. This is the beginning of becoming a someone, but specifically the someone you always wanted to be. Hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, please do give me a like, review, and subscribe. And you can also visit the website, thedrnobodypodcast.com, to learn more about my guests and listen to the episode again. Thanks again for listening to the Dr. Nobody podcast, where we turn nobodies to somebodies. Talk to you all very soon.